Is it risky for a politically exposed person to make payments into your account? The answer to this question varies. Politically exposed persons are people who have held important government positions or who are currently holding government positions, and they are quite very broad: commissioners, ministers, heads of agencies, military personnel, legislators, and so many other categories of persons in that category. Once you're a politically exposed person, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't embark on a legitimate transaction, because a politically exposed person is just a human being like you and I. So this means that they will need to go to the market, they will need to go to the supermarket, they will need to go to the hospital and make sundry payments for goods and services. However, there are instances where when a politically exposed person makes payment into your account, it can be very, very risky. For example, you don't have a job and a politically exposed person makes a significant payment into your account. When that kind of payment comes in, that becomes money laundering, and because you can't justify it and there's no basis for the payment, and that can expose you to criminal sanctions or prosecution. So the only instance under which receiving payments from a politically exposed person will be considered not risky is where the payment is for a legitimate transaction and the payment is for a legitimate source. A legitimate transaction, for example, a politically exposed person takes his wife to a hospital and she has an ailment, she went through treatment, the hospital issued the invoice, and they made payment for the bill from a legitimate source. Once that sort of payment is made and you have your documents establishing that payment, the payment received from the politically exposed person will be considered legitimate and valid. And under this all in this sort of situation, there is nothing to worry about. So what usually happens and how we can protect ourselves when dealing with politically exposed persons is that we must know who we are dealing with. We must embark on our KYC, because financial institutions, including banks, have a duty to make certain reports to their regulators. And where they see suspicious payments, they will also flag this. Or where they see suspicious payments from a suspicious source, they will flag this. So the rule is always ensure that you document any transaction that you have and you are able to establish the validity or the legitimacy of your transaction. Because there are instances where law enforcement agents might be investigating someone and they trace any money that came to your account, they would want to understand the basis for that payment. And where you cannot justify the basis for that payment, it shows that you're part of the scheme or part of an illegal scheme, and you might be sanctioned or you might be prosecuted. So document any transaction you have with a politically exposed person, document any communication you have from a politically exposed person, and always ensure that you keep your record. Some people say that when I sell my property, I don't keep the document anymore because I've discarded the property and I don't need it anymore. This is very risky and very dangerous, because if you sell your property to someone and the person makes payment into your account and you don't retain a copy of that agreement, or you don't retain a copy of the agreement showing how you acquired the property and how you eventually transferred the property, if the law enforcement agents were to investigate the payment into your account, you might be in some real trouble if you can't provide documentary evidence to back up that transaction. So the rule is that we should always keep documents, and it's always advisable that you keep documents for at least 6 years. 6 years. Don't just discard documents after 6 months or after 1 year, because someone who was a politically exposed person and is no longer occupying office, they might be investigated at any point in time. Because as you all know, there's no statute of limitation when it comes to offenses. So the fact that somebody committed an offense 10 years doesn't mean that you can't be investigated because you received part of the payment. So do your KYC, ensure you know the source of the payment, and also ensure that you have documents to show that the transaction is legitimate. This video is, of course, I'm only doing it for those who embark on legitimate transactions and to teach you how to keep your documents and how to de-escalate any risk that might arise from dealing with politically exposed persons. Because certain politically exposed persons don't like to display their identity. If I'm a politically exposed person and my wife is the one running my business, if you were to deal with my wife, that would be a politically exposed transaction. So the fact that you're not dealing with the main person does not necessarily mean that you are not in a politically exposed transaction. Some spouses don't change their names, so you might not know that the wife is married to a politically exposed person. But when you do your KYC and when you make it very clear and that you only engage in legitimate transactions that can be established with document and timestamp, then you have you have nothing to worry about. So to answer my question, is it risky for a politically exposed person to make payments into your account? Yes, it can be risky if the payment has no legitimate purpose or is not from a legitimate source. In that sort of situation, it will be passed on to the law enforcement agents. They will investigate the case and make the necessary prosecutions. But if it's from a legitimate source and for a legitimate transaction that can be established with documents, then you have nothing to worry about. Of course, the account might be frozen for a day or two or for some weeks based on investigation, or you might be invited for law enforcement investigation or interrogation. But when you are engaged in a legitimate transaction, you have nothing to worry because all you just need to do is go with your records to your bank or to a law enforcement agent and show them that I'm a service provider. I provide this sort of service, this is the kind of clients I have, and I did my KYC. I know who I was dealing with. This was what the money was meant for. And when you do that sort of when you're that meticulous in your record keeping, and you can show that it's a legitimate transaction, you have nothing to worry about. So, can you embark on a transaction with a politically exposed person? The answer to the question is yes. Can they make payment into your account? The answer to the question is yes, if the payment is for a legitimate purpose or a legitimate transaction. Thank you very much.